When my best friend Elise vanished from our small town, everyone said she just needed space. But I found her coffee cup still warm, her door locked from the inside, and her laughter gone from the diner. The police searched slowly, I searched desperately, and when I finally found her, she wasn't the only one who'd been trapped. The monsters lived right here, behind familiar smiles. When Elise Tanner went missing, the whole town blinked and pretended everything was normal. I remember the morning like a photograph you can't stop looking at. Brittle November air, the bakery's windows steamed from the ovens, and a thin slice of winter sunlight lifting over the courthouse steeple. I was sweeping the front stoop of my little bookshop, the Marigold shelf, when Sheriff Calloway's cruiser rolled past with its lights off, which never boded well. He waved, I waved back. He had that look he saved for people who asked too many questions, the one that said I'm doing the worrying for you. Elise lived 2 doors down. She ran the coffee counter at the diner and always ordered her coffee black, no sugar. She had been in my life for a decade in the small, easy way of people who see one another in the same places. Every day, library book signings, community theater rehearsals, the occasional town meeting. She was 20, 6 but older in the way some people gather weathered kindness. She painted whimsical watercolors of the town and posted them in the square during the summer festival. She had a laugh that traveled wide and a habit of rescuing stray kittens. On Wednesday morning, the diner's bell didn't jingle. On Thursday, there was a note folded like a paper boat where Elise always sat to talk to me between the lunch rushes. The note was from the diner manager, terse, saying she wasn't in and that they had reported a missing person. They'd waited a day before telling anyone protocol. He said over the phone as if absence were a bureaucratic checklist. I went to the diner because I couldn't do nothing. People in our town disappear like leaves. Sometimes they move away. They go to the city for school, but this was different. The girls at the counter looked hollow, like someone had taken the sugar out of their smiles. Sheriff Calloway said they were searching, instructed us not to speculate, and thanked us for our patience. We have leads, he said. We're doing everything we can. When the "we're doing everything" sounded like a spoon scraping a cheap plate, I felt something in my chest uncoil a low heat, impatient and steady. Elise had once rescued me from an awkward moment at a poetry reading by loudly reciting a piece about bad coffee and honesty. If there was anyone who wouldn't vanish without a fight, it was her. I told myself I'd go home, make a list, and wait. I did none of those things. Instead, I began to ask quiet questions to baristas and the mail carrier, to the boy who ran the florist, and to old Mrs. Grady, who always knew the exact color of everyone's hair. A lot of people had seen Elise the night before at the small group that met at the church to knit and exchange recipes, at the little craft fair down by the river, at her apartment with lights on, but no one could place her after midnight. The last confirmed sighting was at the corner of Hill and Main, where a paperboy said he'd seen her walking toward the river path alone. After that, she became a rumor and then a silence. The police had canvassed the usual spots and taken statements. They had a handful of ambiguous CCTV shots, grainy, inconclusive. We can't jump from nothing, Calloway told me on the porch of the station, the gravel crunching under his boots. He offered me condolences like a man dishing out small coins. If anything changes, you let us know, Elise. It's me, I corrected. I'll let you know, Sheriff. I didn't tell him that calling him Sheriff felt like presenting at someone else's play, that in my chest I had already decided that the play wouldn't end the way he described. I left with a badge of annoyance I couldn't shrug. That night, curled beneath an Afghan by the window, I thought about how well people could hide in plain sight. We'd known Elise for years, and yet there were thin curtains in her life. I had traded books for gossip, then for trust. I realized with a cold, rising clarity that waiting on the sheriff to find what I could see with my own eyes was selfish. Elise wouldn't wait, neither could I. I started small, a visit to her apartment. It was clean in the way of a place loved by someone who painted and made lists. Her brushes sat in a jar by the window, drying. A half-finished watercolor of the river was propped against the easel. A tea mug on the sill had a lipstick smudge. I opened drawers. I read a journal entry where she'd scrawled, "I'll finish this one, the river knows stories." There was nothing else. She had not taken her phone or wallet. Her apartment door had been locked only from inside. The way it sat, mute and ordinary, told me she had left with someone she trusted or had been taken. There were clues if one wanted to bend down and pick them up like pebbles. A scrap of fabric under the sink, not hers. A receipt in the trash for a motel an hour away with a time stamp. After midnight, the sheriff took the receipt and nodded, but his nod was professional and not sharp. "Lots of people drive," he said, "not Elise." I said it like a prayer and then like a stone aimed at a window. "She doesn't sleep in motels." My voice trembled over the last word in a way that surprised both of us. Calloway promised to dig into the motel's logs. He did. They found nothing direct, just a faded name on a registration card that could have been anyone's. If the police were the slow-moving river, I would be a blade of a twig thrown in to test the current. I started asking questions in places where questions went unnoticed. The kids working late, night shifts at the gas station, remembered a delivery van idling near the river path around midnight. A jogger thought she'd heard a muffled shout, but thought it was a fox. A fisherman swore he'd seen a truck heading toward the old quarry around 1 a.m., its taillights disappearing like a swallowed star. There's a particular kind of adrenaline when you begin to see patterns that others dismiss as noise. It's dangerous because it seduces you into thinking you've already solved the puzzle. I felt that pull and I pushed against it. My notebook filled with names, times, and the impression of the town's topography, the quarry, the river bend, the old radio tower, places where light could be hidden and breath could be muffled. At the third day, someone put a bouquet of wildflowers on the bakery counter with a note. "Come find her," no signature. The flowers had been crushed in a hurry, like someone who couldn't wait. The note burned in my purse for hours. I told myself I was only following a thread. I did not tell myself I was tying it around my wrist until the day I decided to follow the trail out past the town limits to where the road dwindled and the trees leaned like gatekeepers. Chapter 2, The Loose Thread. The quarry was the kind of place our town kept at arm's length. A scar in the map where people went when they needed to peel themselves from company. It reeked faintly of rust and river mud. And the things left behind, there are places that scrape your soul like gravel. This was one of them. I went at dusk because light helps you see, and because dusk is the hour when people slip between shadows. My sneakers crunched on loose rock. The water at the base of the quarry pooled dark and flat. I found a discarded cigarette pack, a snapped bobby pin, and underneath a thicket of brambles a ribbon the exact color of one of Elise's scarves. My stomach spun. The world pressed around me like a thumb. I called Sheriff Calloway and left a message. He called back and asked me to stay put while he assembled a team. "We're on our way, Elise," he said. There was gratitude in his voice like an offering. But there's a gratitude that binds, the kind that says, "Do as I tell and I will protect you." I didn't wait. I slipped deeper into the thorned underbrush until the town's lights were a distant smear. That's when I saw the tire tracks, 2 distinct lanes, fresh, cutting into the dirt as if someone had come and left only hours before. They headed toward a service road I'd seen from the top of the hill. The road that led to an old industrial yard that had been repurposed into storage units and abandoned businesses. It was a place children dared one another to explore, but it was also where grown men kept things they wanted hidden. There was a van parked by a shuttered warehouse, its windows dark and the engine cold. I crouched behind a rusted pallet and watched. A man came out, a silhouette at first, smoking and talking on his phone in a voice too loud for a place that had no neighbors. He wore a work jacket with a small logo, Holloway Maintenance. I noted the logo in my head like a tick on a map, and then the man walked away to a car, head bent, and I saw the catch in his step. He was missing the same small scar on his lip that I had seen in a faded photo of the town's handyman, Tom Holloway, a man with a steady jaw and a slow smile, who mowed the lawn at the church on Sundays and fixed Mrs. Keene's fence. There were no coincidences. The ribbon tracks, the logo, they braided together into a rope I could climb. The next morning I paid a visit to the Holloway maintenance shop under the pretense of needing a shelf fixed. Tom's wife, Lisa, greeted me, all warmth and flour. Dusted hands, she brewed coffee strong enough to steady a skittish heart and asked me questions about the book club she wanted to join. Tom's at the church, actually, she said casually when I mentioned the logo, topping off my cup. He does a lot of odd jobs. Why? Any idea where he might be last night around midnight? I asked. She laughed a small laugh, the kind that tries to keep a secret light. Tom, midnight, he's a homebody, Elise, listens to the radio and falls asleep in his chair. Why? If she'd been a liar, she'd have turned green. Instead, she turned very ordinary. Maybe you should ask the sheriff, she added, too quickly. When you live here long enough, you learn how to read small signals, the pressure on a lip, the way a hand pauses on a cup. Lisa's hands trembled. Her eyes slid away from mine. Tom was not a man of shadows. He had a boys' chorus photo on his workshop wall and a plaque from the Rotary Club. I liked Tom. He'd once fixed the bookshop's broken hinge and refused to take money. That's precisely why my mind kept pushing against the simplicity of his image. Because real life rarely makes the most convenient suspect the villain, it prefers the comfortable. I started digging further. The motel receipt turned out to be for a room registered under a name that matched a misspelled alias of a man who'd been arrested years ago for an abduction attempt. Towns over a man named Walter Green. He'd been arrested and released on a technicality, a ghost of a conviction. The old case file had been buried under a decade of bureaucracy, and the sheriff's office had only a few volunteers who knew to pull the papers. Calloway assured me they were looking into Green, but he emphasized they didn't have proof he was in town. Green's face was a study in forgettable menace, a man designed by bad choices and a mug-shot camera. He'd worked odd jobs, left the town for stretches of time, and returned like a bad weather front no one wanted to talk about. People muttered that he'd learned to stay invisible. What terrifies you more, a monster who roars or a wolf in a neighbor's cardigan? I felt the town holding both as it watched me ask the wrong questions. If the sheriff could only see in official channels, I had to be unofficial. So I went to the places where the town's underside met its edges. The deli where Green liked his late-night sandwiches, the bar where a handyman's pockets jingled with interest, the pawn shop where stray things found new names. At the pawn shop, Tom Holloway's name came up like a bad odor. A man who worked the counter, a lanky guy named Merle with tattoos like parentheses, mentioned seeing Tom and Green arguing in the parking lot 2 nights before Elise went missing. Pulled a woman into a van, he said, flipping through a ledger. He shrugged. They argued like that all the time. Tom doesn't like men messing with the town. Something inside me angled the truth. What if Tom had been trying to stop Green? What if Tom had paid with his silence in a different currency? The ledger coughed up a receipt for chains and rope bought under a name matching a subcontractor on a demolition crew. It was the sort of thing you used to tie up a neighbor's old porch swing, not a person. But in places where people get used and tossed, everyday items find new, ugly purposes. That evening, as twilight spread like ash, I trailed a white van I'd seen at the quarry not because I was brave, but because I was stubborn. It turned into the old radio tower lot where the town stored its forgotten things, empty crates, rusted engines, and an overturned kayak that used to belong to the school's outdoor club. The van parked beside a shipping container. A tall man stepped out with the same logo as the work jacket I'd seen and a voice like gravel. He was not Tom. He had greener hands. He had the kind of smile that comes with a practiced innocence. He opened the container. When the doors peeled back, the air smelled of bleach and fear. There were tarps folded in a way meant to hide something. My heart stuttered an animal's reaction, and I tuned my breath to the rhythm of the night. I pulled my phone out to call Calloway. As the cruiser's headlights swept the yard, the man looked up. He saw me. For a second time, I had that particular instant of paralytic clarity. Eye of the storm. He slammed the container shut and waved, friendly and casual like a neighbor who'd seen me misplace a cat. "Morning, Elise," he called out to the darkness, and then he laughed in a way too loud for the space. "You lost your marigolds." My stomach dropped with the joke. I knew then that I was perilously close. I knew then that curiosity had become danger, and that the only way forward was through it. I left and I called Sheriff Calloway and I lied. I said I'd seen a van at the quarry and that I thought it might be connected. He came like the law does when called by a private citizen, slower than guilt, faster than grief. They found the container empty, tarps folded, and a cigarette butt with white ash near the latch. The van was gone. Green's name sat at the center of a map like a malignancy, but it didn't explain maintenance, logo, or the way Tom's wife flinched. I had stitches and no pattern. My notebook became a map of half. Promises. People in town started avoiding me. Rumors gathered like clouds. My phone buzzed with anonymous calls in the night. Someone left a hand. Painted sign on the bookshop's window. Stop poking. The note was ugly, the paint thick and pulpy. It was an order disguised as protection. I wanted to stop. God, I wanted to crawl back into the neatness of my life and my shelf of books. But every morning I woke with the same ache. Elise's laugh stuck in my throat. I promised her, even though she didn't know that I would find her. That promise became the only language I could speak. Chapter 3, The knot unties, the plan was small and messy. I baited the net with what I had a story on the community bulletin board about a lost sketchbook, and me, helplessly anxious, offering a reward of every coupon from my attic. It didn't have to be a real sketchbook. It only had to be something someone greedy or frightened might take the bait for. The van came within an hour, as if someone had been watching the board waiting for the bait. This time I wasn't alone. I'd told Mrs. Grady, who despite her 82 years had the eyes of a hawk, and Ollie Jensen, a teenager who liked sneaking into the closed theater and who loved nothing more than a true mystery. I gave them roles. Mrs. Grady would call the sheriff once the van pulled up, and Ollie would film just enough. I would be the one who stayed visible like a light to the moths. They pulled up as dusk glossed the town in honey. The man I'd seen at the container stepped out. He was not alone. A second man sat in the back, his profile like a silhouette of bad decisions. The van's side door slid open, and as if the earth itself inhaled, a sound came from within, muffled and small. Ollie's camera shook in his hands. Mrs. Grady's breath came like a clock. I should have called the sheriff. I should have waited for the legal cavalry. All I did was step forward in a way that surprised me with its brashness. "Hey," I called. "That's my sketchbook." The man laughed, and it sounded like rocks scraping. The second man looked toward me, and for the first time I saw something behind the practiced face, a flicker of fear, not the swagger of a confident predator, but the panic of a conspirator thinking too much noise. The van's doors opened a sliver, and then a figure stumbled out, pale, limping, wrapped in a blanket. It was Elise. My knees almost failed me. Time elongated in that impossible way, a slow-motion car crash where a single second stretches into a lifetime. She saw me, and for a beat her eyes widened like a person who waked from a dream into a worse one, then recognition, and then a smile that was a broken thing glued back together. Before anyone could move, the man with the Holloway jacket lunged. He wasn't Tom. I should have known the features of the common place, the town's many hands that built and repaired, but I had been deceived. The jacket was a uniform bought online. The man grabbed my wrist with a force that tasted of riverside gravel. "You shouldn't have come," he hissed. "You'll ruin everything." I pulled my arm back and swung a fist like a woman who had been rehearsing rage in the mirror for days. I didn't hit him hard. I hit with the element of surprise. He stumbled, cussing. Ollie darted forward, yelling. Mrs. Grady gave a sound like an animal and slammed into the man, hitting him with a purse and a will like an army. We were clumsy and heroic all at once. The three of us, old, young, and stubborn, made too much noise. The van's passenger started the engine. Behind him, a shadow moved, a smaller, quieter man I'd seen in the background at the diner. Someone who'd always been almost noticed, Andrew Pike, the community center janitor. He had the look of a man who carries children's drawings in his lunchbox and keeps the lights on at night. He was the last person you'd accuse. He was the worst possible person to be the heart of this. It was Andrew who hesitated. He looked at the van, at the mess of us, at Elise clutching the blanket like a treasure, and something a sliver of conscience or fear split him. He climbed out, hands trembling, eyes wet. I didn't know it would. He started, voice thin. A truth can sometimes be a physical thing, like a cheap curtain being shredded. He began to tell us, sprawling confession like spilled buttons. Green had been using Andrew's knowledge of the town's spare keys and the maintenance man's trust to move through the back doors of the places he wanted. Andrew had been roped into the periphery years ago, frightened into silence the way you are when someone holds a ledger of your faults and invoices your shame. He wasn't Fist, he was the locksmith who opened the door. Walter Green, the man resurfacing from old sins, was the orchestrator. He'd used a small group of men, a handyman, a van driver, a janitor, a man with nothing to lose to snatch people who had something to offer on the black market for favors. Money, labor, the perverse pleasure of control. Elise had been mistaken for someone else, or maybe she'd simply been in the wrong place at the wrong hour when Green needed a body for a debt. When Andrew realized the depth of Green's cruelty, the way he kept people in the dark, the way he fed off fear, he panicked and tried to quit. Green had kept Elise as leverage. Sheriff Calloway pulled up at the end of Andrew's confession like a slow sun rising on an already chaotic morning. He seemed flummoxed and then practical. He read the scene like a bad book and then decided to stop trying to rewrite it. Green's van was traced. His hideout, a run-down motel in a neighboring town, was the obvious next step. By that afternoon, Green was in custody, slouching in an interrogation room with the dull despondency of a man who finally realized his scripts were being read to him. But the real victory, the one that lodged warm and stubborn in my chest, was watching Elise breathe without the weight of someone else's palm on her throat. She hugged me as if she could rearrange the past into something softer. She spoke in fragments, about chains in the shed, about the smell of machine oil and wet concrete, about the song a man hummed to stop himself from hearing her. The thing that broke her most was not the confinement, but the quiet in which she had to wait, the waiting that turned hours into rooms. Green's trial was a town event. Everyone came to participate in the ritual of justice. Some of us clung to the courtroom benches like we were tethers to the world becoming right. Andrew took a plea and testified. Tom, who had no place in this particular tangle, testified about the maintenance jackets sold to anyone with cash. Merle at the pawn shop testified about ledger and the rumor. Each small thing fit into the larger machine of accountability. During testimony, watching Green there, I felt the town's eyes shift from me to him and back again. The case exposed things we'd preferred to leave unexamined, how easily trust becomes a tool for those who want to take. It revealed the dangerous comfort of ignoring the small fissures until they become chasms. And it revealed, shining stubborn as a lighthouse, how ordinary people can refuse to be passengers when the current pulls hard. We arrested more than the obvious players. We found that Green had been trafficking labor and favors, not for money always, but for influence. That fact cut deep. He'd woven a web out of need and convenience and called it business. The men who worked for him were not monsters by birth. They were men who had learned the economy of fear because we hadn't taught them better. The law did what the law could. Jails filled, papers filed, gavel struck. The town tried to stitch itself back together. After the trial, when the dust of legal formalities fell, life returned in halting, gentle ways. The Marigold shelf reopened with a new display of Elise's watercolors. The diner brought back her favorite booth. Sheriff Calloway brought donuts to the bookshop, which he probably thought would smooth over the awkwardness of my vigilante detours. He thanked me properly, not with the professional platitudes, but with something like humility. "You did what we didn't have the bandwidth to do right away," he said, and the gratefulness in his voice steadied like a hand on my shoulder. Elise slept sometimes at my apartment. We made tea and read aloud from books that said brave things. She painted again, though the edges of her watercolors were softer, the colors more careful. She told me she would testify whenever necessary, but that she wanted to find a way to sit with what had happened without letting it define her. She wanted to teach watercolor classes to kids. She wanted to stack her brushes like prayer. In the months that followed, there were changes that felt small but mattered. The town renovated the quarry into a little park with lights and benches. The community center improved its background checks. We started a neighborhood watch that actually met and had baked goods. We learn to speak the names of the missing before they can be forgotten. We also learned how easy it is to slide into complacency. Some nights I walk down to the river and sit on the bench where Elise once painted sunsets. The town hums softly around me. My bookshop bell jingles now for customers who come in looking for stories rather than shelter. Once, when a stray teenager asked why I'd put my life at risk, I told him that doing nothing costs more than doing something. He looked at me with the tragic impatience of the young and said, "Did it feel like being a hero?" It didn't. It felt like being a person who could not stand idly by while someone she loved was being used as a bargaining chip. It felt like a rotten, necessary compulsion to correct an injustice. Heroism, I've learned, is often just the name we give to stubbornness that outlasts fear. Elise recovered in the public and the private ways. At her first class, a small girl painted a crooked tree, and then her face when she showed Elise pure worship, a miracle in pigment. Elise smiled and told her, "Perfect." Painted again, the repeated attempt, the permission to be imperfect, seemed to stitch something into place. Green is behind bars. The men who helped him paid in months and jail cells, and for some, humbling work to earn back trust. Andrew got therapy and a job mending shoes in the town's thrift shop. He came by the bookshop one rainy afternoon with a box of mismatched laces and said simply, "Sorry," like a prayer. I forgave him the way you forgive a person who is learning to be human again. The marquee above the theater reads a new show this month, The Marigold Mystery, a shameful, sentimental thing the theater co-op cobbled together, smiling at itself and at the town's need to process and to laugh. I bought a ticket and sat in the dark, hand in Elise's hand. We squeezed once at the moment of the curtain, and the town's theater swallowed the sound of our breathing. We were not invincible, we were not immune, but when the town needed a hand, someone offered one. People who were quiet and ordinary, a janitor, an elderly woman, a bookshop owner, did what the grand gestures of authority couldn't do fast enough. They showed up. The last painting Elise gave me hangs above my counter. It's a watercolor of the river with a boat, cut out bright as a promise. The caption she painted beneath it reads, "Found." It is the most ordinary miracle, and the most truthful one I can imagine. When people ask me now why I refuse to let it go, I say, because a life is not rumor to be waited out, because it felt like the right thing to do, and sometimes the right thing is loud and foolish and impossible. Because a friend once saved me with a poem about bad coffee and honesty, and I owed her a page in return. The town heals slowly, as towns do not in perfect arcs, but in repeated acts of ordinary care. I learned something visceral and terrible, that evil often arrives wrapped in civility, and that to unmask it, you have to be willing to look past the comforting masks. And I learned something luminous, that ordinary stubbornness, when multiplied by a town of people who refuse to pretend they don't see, can make a miracle happen. Elise paints on, and sometimes when the rain is fine and the lights are low, I think I can hear the town breathing a little easier, as if someone has finally turned off an engine that had been running too long. Please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.